Alan Haller, he spoke at length with Graham Couch a few weeks ago about NIL, transferring, Central Michigan, all sorts of stuff. So, yeah, we talked to the one, the only Graham Couch. But first, guys, kickoff times. Let's go.
You are Locked On Spartans, your daily podcast on the Michigan State Spartans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of Locked On Spartans is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege. That's all one word, LOCKEDONCollege, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms, got that right, they apply. Spartan friends, Spartan family, Locked On Spartans listeners, thank you all so much for tuning into Locked On Spartans, your team in green and white 5 days a week. Until next week, Graham, I'm getting lazy on the people. I'm slowing down to 3 days a week in June and July, and then August, we're back to 5 days a week. But just a programming note right off the top. And now it's time to formally introduce our guest, even though he doesn't need an introduction. It's Graham Couch, Lansing State Journal, Couch of the Rube podcast, and great friend of this program. Graham, fresh off a little vacation last week. How on earth are we feeling right now? We doing okay?
Yeah, I'm good. Like, when do you take your weeks off? When do you get, like, full weeks off? Are there none?
Probably when I'm 6 feet under, Graham. That's probably, as far as I'm concerned, that's when we do it over here.
I'm going to talk to your boss. They would get a better Matt Sheehan if you took weeks off. Let me say that.
Yeah. We're just a wave of momentum. We got to keep it rolling. And if I stopped for even 2 seconds, who knows what would happen on the other side of that break? But no, hey, you know what? The content oven is always hot over here. So yeah, we keep it popping even 3 days a week in the summer. But Graham, you had awesome columns about your chat with Alan Haller. We're going to get to that here in a little bit. But hey, massive earth-shattering news coming out of East Lansing, the college football world. We're going to start backwards here from week 3 because game times were announced. Now working backwards, Prairie View A&M, 3:30, Big Ten Network. Week 2, the prior week at Maryland, 3:30, Big Ten Network. But Graham, the national nightmare is over. Our long wait is done. Week 1, Florida Atlantic gets moved to Friday. Everything is right in the world. 7 p.m. kickoff on, you guessed it, Big Ten Network. But Grant, everything is right in the world, correct? That this game got moved to a Friday night?
It's what most people want. I know there are people who don't love it, but it's become tradition since 2011. So except for 1 year, and I think people prefer it and they're used to it, and it allows you to have that whole Labor Day weekend. I think people tend not to like the other Fridays as much, except for this one. People have asked me before, when does Michigan State get that favor paid back to them? And I don't know that this is it, but you may never know when it's that exact thing, because one of the things Alan Haller mentioned to me last week is they do not have the control they used to have.
Right.
And so that's a challenge. There can be, you can want this tradition. My guess is it won't always be there. But they did take 2 Friday night games during the season. And maybe this is something where they said, we'll make this happen for you. I don't know. Maybe they had zero control over any of it.
One thing to just nitpick about, and this is just so bottom barrel from me, but if there's anything to nitpick about, it's 3 games on Big Ten Network, but these aren't the flashiest opponents. Let's have an honest discussion here. Michigan State still has to do some work here to get back on the national stage, and they do have a national game against Oregon. But if you're going to just be the most grumpy person of all time and find something to complain about here, that would be it, I suppose. But Graham, also on the flip side, with 5 games scheduled right now, none of them right now, knock on wood, are Peacock only. So we got that going for us at least.
Yeah, and this isn't a season where you're necessarily looking to show off the program every week, and you don't mind being under the radar. And hey, if you get off to a 3-0 start, all of a sudden people are like, oh, hey, look, Michigan State's 3-0.
Yeah.
You do want this to be a season where you have some moments where people say, hey, where you get noticed. You do something decent. Even if you don't beat Oregon, you have, you're competitive for a while, or Aiden Childs is spectacular. You leave the season with people going, boy, Michigan State looks like they may be a program that's on the rise. And for that, you need some moments where people see you. But they'll get those. I mean, that October slate is really starting the end of September with Ohio State is wicked. And if you can have a moment or two in there somewhere, maybe people will realize it.
Now, I do like this from the Big Ten release that they dropped. They said Iowa at Michigan State. That is the homecoming game for our Spartans. They say 12 p.m. or 3:30 p.m. or 4 p.m. or 7:30 p.m. Network to be determined. So they're just essentially saying we know the game's going to happen eventually. So I do like that little nugget from the Big Ten Network there.
Yeah, and usually homecoming games aren't night games, so I'll be surprised if that's at night. Usually you can push back on that, but maybe in this new day and age, you can't. And as I would tell people, like I don't think anybody should have to like anything.
Yeah.
But when you are at a game you don't like the game time or the day of, just think Olympic sports at MSU are able to happen because I am here at an inconvenient time.
There we go. We're all taking one for the team here collectively. Yeah. Look at us go. Pat yourselves on the back at home if you're listening to this right now. Grant, we got to shift over to your great pieces, really. You had some B-roll, too, at the very end, talking about the Central Michigan thing, which I hope to get to. But just first and foremost, with your chat with Alan Haller, you guys talked about everything under the sun, it seemed like. This is a trivial question, but how long was this conversation with Alan? How long did you get to sit down with him for?
It was probably 90 minutes.
Okay.
Roughly, we said, yeah, it was in that realm. He's been very busy and was gracious to Grant's request. We've been trying to do it for a couple weeks, and he had a window, and it was good. And I've obviously known Alan a long time, and I have a pretty good rapport with him, and he's those when you get him in his office, those are the best settings because he is. He'll give you some off-the-record stuff that you can't use, but he's pretty open, pretty blunt about a lot, and pretty willing to go places.
What's some of the off-the-record stuff that he – no, I'm just kidding. No, so obviously, he's buttoned up, he's professional. He's everything you want in a select director in front of the media and in front of the public, of course. But in that private conversation, is that the same Alan Haller that we get in front of a microphone for press conferences, or is he a little bit more passionate or emotional, so to speak?
Some of it, yeah. I mean, he is a what you see is what you get guy a lot. Sometimes he's been careful here in bits and pieces, but he'll have moments where he'll go places you don't expect on the record. He'll go places that his predecessors probably wouldn't have, which I from my very first chats with him realized, and he's just been more open about revenue sharing and.
Sure.
Projects and things like that than maybe in the past, and willing to sort of break news through conversation like that. So yeah, he's real good. And then when he's got something he's not sure he wants to share, he'll take it off the record, but he'll tell you a lot. He's I wouldn't say he's an open book because certainly during the Jonathan Smith hiring process, I got zero from him other than a smile. So it was like it was unbelievable how little he gave, and he was for that reason nobody really saw it coming, right? I mean, it was well constructed there, that search process. But for the most part, yeah, he's somebody who is not afraid to give you whatever you ask.
And you guys talked about everything under the sun, like I've already said, and like a lot of people have already read, of course. What topic of the many you talked about got him the most animated, fired up, passionate, whatever? Synonym of any of those words to just use, like what got him speaking or riled up the most when you guys talked?
It's a good question. I don't know if anything got him riled. I mean, there were, I did not expect when I brought up Connor Stallions, I misread how that situation would offend him. I didn't think it would. I thought, and I talked about it on Couch in the Rube that I thought, here's an AD who probably doesn't think about it the way fans do.
Right.
But I also knew that it had to be asked because I get asked about Connor Stallions more than I get asked about just about anything other than like the center position on the basketball team.
There you go.
So it needed to be asked. And it was very clear. And at some point, maybe he'll get into more details. He did not want to embarrass Central Michigan. But he was disappointed in the response or lack thereof.
Yeah.
And worked to formulate a statement that he could use. I think, and he didn't want to. He was very careful and came up with the idea that he was waiting for the end of the investigation, basically. But how it turned out could impact the future relationship with Central Michigan, which I thought was telling. I mean, we'll see where that goes. And look, it is stunning that all these months later, it has been as quiet as it has, even when you have an NCAA investigation.
Yes. Like it sounds like not even any discussions have been had even behind closed doors between Amy Full and the Central Michigan Athletic Director and Alan Haller. I still want to stay on that topic of conversation. when we start the next segment, I'm going to see how much of a petulant child I am when it comes to the Central Michigan thing. But first, Graham, I'm so sorry I need to send you to the bench because, folks, Gametime needs to be talked about because it is the greatest ticketing app out there. We're talking sporting events. We're talking concerts. We're talking comedy shows. We're talking anything that has a ticket attached to it. You can find yourself some great deals over at Gametime for all sorts of people, too. Let's say that you are a great planner. You know, like 2 weeks in advance, you're going to be going to this thing. Well, hop on. You're going to see some great deals leading up to the game, deals that you cannot find anywhere else. Or the opposite end of the spectrum, let's say that 20 minutes before the game, you just want to stumble out of your Detroit apartment and say, well, let's go to the Tigers game. Why not? Hop on, find some last-minute ticket deals for you. They have deals up until even after the first pitch, guys. Gametime is here to save you that cheddar. And they also do it so transparently. You're not going to get popped with surprise fees, if I get that out of my mouth. At the very end of the transaction, it is all up front for you over at Gametime. So download the Gametime app, create an account, and go ahead and save right off the bat with promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. It's Gametime, last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, let's drag him back on here. Co-host of Couch in the Rube podcast and Last State Journal columnist and just great friend of the program. Thanks a lot for agreeing to hop on here yet again, Graham. Really appreciate you. And one thing I do like to do whenever you hop on is kind of have you babysit me here for a little bit because I can get a little passionate, get a little fired up. You're very level-headed. I came out here a few weeks ago after you wrote that great piece about Central Michigan, the lack of interactions, the lack of transparency. And I said, okay, you know what? Screw them. Like, we're done playing Central in any sport for the time being. Is that a little extreme, grammar? Like, do you kind of agree with me here? Like, because it's kind of ridiculous.
I mean, I do think there is, you should get some answers because there is something to the idea that, you know, a coach of your rival was on the sideline during their game and helping them, scouting Michigan, you know, whatever he was getting out of it entirely. And so that's a problem and that should be answered for. And if it's not, I don't see any issue with saying, hey, we're going to pause things a little bit. I don't know if I would, you know, it's tough if you've got deals going, like if you're women's basketball and you've got Kristen Haney, who's the women's basketball coach there, who's a Michigan State legend from Mason, like, and you want a relationship there and to keep playing, you know, I don't know that that's worth canceling that. I would probably keep it to football, maybe men's basketball, places that financially there is an impact that you can kind of speak of if you wanted to make that statement. But I don't think, you know, in other sports too, where you're talking about sports where travel expenses are a big deal in some of the non-revs, taking Central Michigan off the table doesn't make a lot of sense. But in football, men's basketball, I would, you know, if I don't think there's anything wrong with considering that until you get a response that's satisfactory.
And speaking of those non-revenue sports here, just revenue in general, this was probably, you know, the quote that I found most interesting out of that first initial piece where you wrote about a lot. It was Alan Haller saying that he will not let sport cuts happen. And of course, this comes on the heels of Michigan State and all other universities being on the hook for something in the ballpark of $22 million for revenue sharing. But here was the quote from Alan Haller. It was, quote, "I don't plan on having this new system impacting the way we look as a department. I've said it. I'm not an advocate of cutting sports. That's not going to be part of it. That's when you will look for a new AD." Point blank period, Graham. Like, can this all happen without cutting sports? And this might funnel into the next conversation about stadium naming rights and jersey patches. But like, is that possible that you can go forward without having to axe any of these sports?
Sure. I mean, you know, he does also say in the piece that, you know, tough decisions are going to have to be made, but it does not sound like it's people related in terms of getting rid of people. And I do think, you know, in terms of stadium projects or, you know, bells and whistles or, you know, we'll see what coaching salaries look like going forward in a lot of places. There are ways to save money in college athletics without cutting sports, but that's the easiest way to save a bundle. So sort of laying the hammer down that this is not going to happen, at least under his leadership, is, I think, probably a good way to calm the athletic department and to calm people's fears.
Sure.
And that they're going to try to be competitive in those settings. Now, how many scholarships are allocated to different places is something that could be looked at. There are lots of ways you fund a sport, and to what degree every sport is funded. Although he said, repeatedly to me that no sport is just going to exist at Michigan State. He wants sports to compete. And I think we've seen that with some of his decisions to get rid of, move on from coaches and bring in new coaches. So I don't think he plans to not fund any sport either at a level that allows them to compete. And so how that all gets done, I mean, there are a lot of things that still are, even as this House NCAA case gets sort of adjudicated and signed and the conferences are okay with it, there's a lot still to sort of figure out and what's it all going to look like. And I don't think even people in the space who are making these decisions are sure yet. It's
tough.
Yeah. Because there's part of me that, like, none of this was bargained for with the athletes. So this doesn't prevent any lawsuits to me. They think it does, but it doesn't. And
gotcha.
How much is NIL still going to play a role? And Michigan State is lucky to be one of the schools that does become a have, and the other thing, though, is a have relative to other schools. The other thing that happens is how you fund college sports. There are a lot of schools that the university itself has to chip in, and maybe Michigan State becomes one of those places over time. That's a fair thing too. Then that's something that's not. If you value something, you should pay for it. But these are all great questions, and I think how student athletes are viewed as they're making good money will be something that's a topic. One of the things I thought about with the Jaden Mangum going to Michigan and sort of the backlash that he felt. And, 2 years ago, I would have felt like, or 3 years ago, I was always cringing when people went after student athletes. But now that passion is why their paycheck exists the way it does.
Yeah.
And that's just part of the deal. And so if you want to cross these boundaries and the irrational thoughts that you have in your mind, Matt Sheehan, are what is providing the funds and the interest and everything that exists for college sports. And so those irrational thoughts are going to continue to be part of the game.
Great.
And people have to deal with it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just so tricky in the day and age of NIL. And we talked about it. This is a few months ago, just on a side conversation. But look, I'm not getting on here and just looking for an excuse to rail on kids or, just to be completely unfair when we criticize them. But when you're doing college sports content and you're discussing what happens during a game, in the days of yore, hey, these kids are trying their best. They're working hard, all for a scholarship. They're being exploited. But now some of these kids are making more money than I'll see in the next 10 years combined. And it's well, I'm not going to go out of my way to badger you. Maybe we could be a little more honest with our dialogue. Does that make sense? It's hard to articulate because, again, I'm not trying to be a rat bastard here. I'm just trying to have an honest dialogue.
Some of them are still kids. They're, not fully formed at 19, 20 years old. And I think you need to be careful of that. The flip side of that is Michigan State's basketball starting lineup was older than many of the lineups the Pistons put on the floor last year.
Yes, correct.
And a bunch of 23-year-olds out there for the most part. So how do you look at that? And I do think it is an interesting discussion. You should generally just treat people decently.
Okay.
And if you do that and fairly, then it's not a problem. You don't go after people personally.
Yeah.
But I do think the component, look, college athletics is not popular for its level of play. That's not why these guys aren't that good. They're good, but they're not that good. And you could form pro leagues with 3 steps in between the NFL and college football, 3 steps between, the NBA and college basketball, a couple steps. And you already have it with the G League, right?
Yep.
And nobody's going to Grand Rapids Drive or Motor City Cruise games. Those teams would kick the living crap out of Michigan State and Michigan every day of the week.
Yep.
And so what players and everybody has to understand is it is the rivalries, it is the passion, it is the sense of community that fans share with players. And when that's being disrupted, when that's being threatened, people aren't going to like it. And it's okay for them to feel that way. And maybe the house of cards that college athletics was built on never should have existed. I used to joke that the first thing I always thought before I wrote every column is the idea that major college sports should not exist. And if you start there, you can write a rational column. And it's true. I mean, because college sports, if all the things that are in place today or how they were going to begin, we wouldn't have them. No, the interest never would have grown. The question is, with what they're transitioning to, can we maintain enough of what's been built in terms of interest to fund them and make them fun and keep people engaged? I don't entirely have an answer. And I think with Haller, to get back to the point on that, he is more optimistic than maybe I am on all that. He thinks there is a level of even the amateurism nature, not amateurism itself, but the amateurism nature that can be kept, that college sports can feel like college sports. And I hope that's true to some degree.
And, speaking of tradition, why people love college sports, anyone that loves all that will certainly love this next topic of conversation here. And this is something that's going down in the Panhandle right now in Florida. SEC meetings are taking place, all the bigwigs down there, and the SEC sets the tone for a lot of college sports. One of the agenda items of this meeting are we going to start allowing midfield corporate logos on the 25-yard line, corporate logos on jersey patches. That's right. Surely everyone's going to be just absolutely thrilled about this. But when you're on the hook for $22 million, I mean, look, this Ross Dellinger piece for Yahoo Sports, it says that field logos can go for upwards of $1 million, jersey patches in the ballpark of $5 million. He didn't even name stadium naming rights, but I'm sure that that's very much going to be on the table here, because at least in the pros, that could be anywhere from $1 to $7 million. That's just a wide ballpark number. So Graham, with Buick logos on their jerseys, are we going to be seeing Michigan State take the field at United Wholesale Mortgage Field at Spartan Stadium here in the near future? Kind of seems inevitable that something's going to happen from a corporate sponsorship level, whether it's naming rights, patches, whatever it is going to be.
Absolutely. I mean, you already saw in Alan Haller go the route with the Caesars Sportsbook, and there's backlash to that, and that went away. But willing to go find other avenues of revenue. And I think people will get used to this. The NBA patches on the shoulder, people got used to it. If you follow British soccer, European soccer, my mother just brought over an old Manchester United shirt of my father's, which is really cool, the jersey, except the primary logo on there is of some, 2008 sponsor, that's just the way it is. And people get used to that.
Yeah.
In the college game, it'll be one thing people don't like, but I do think there are elements. We're used to advertising. We're used to advertising, being inundated with it. There are other elements that are more important to hold on to. And if that helps you hold on to the other aspects of college athletics, that helps you get to a place where this is stabilized and you can build a roster and keep a culture and those sort of things that I think are more important to a fan base then so be it. But yeah, that's where we're absolutely headed. They're going to maximize this every which way.
And they talked about it in the Yahoo Sports piece that probably on-field corporate logos aren't likely, but still it could be on there. I just got to say though, I mean, look, I love the Spartan logo. It'd be ridiculous to replace with the corporate logo at midfield, but I got to say a University Wiener logo at midfield, if not for nothing else, would be worth a laugh every time you walk in the stadium. I'm not sure that's what Michigan State's going for. But money talks. So, yeah.
We called with the couch, and we called the idea for the couch and the Rube logo. Our offer was laughed at, though. We did not have quite the means to make it work. Yeah. But we may be able to. I think if we get something going with MSU's field hockey program, maybe we can put something at the center of their logo.
Ladder on up there. I like that. Start small, work your way on up. This is one other thing that I found interesting from the Alan Haller piece, and it was near the end, and he's talking about he saw the Fire Haller hashtags, which, again, when you're the one that's, receiving all this ire, I'm sure you don't forget that. For me, I don't really remember that much scrutiny against Alan Haller, but one thing I found fascinating is that, it came out that his daughter created a burner account on Twitter to be a one-person crusade against all the slander being brought on her dad. So the question is, Graham, she's getting, way better birthday gifts this year, right? I mean, she has to. That's a great kid.
I thought that was cool that he shared that. And I think one of the cool things about that is nobody would fault somebody's kid for, regardless for jumping in. And even I think MSU fans, if Jim Harbaugh's kid was defending him, MSU fans would totally get that. That's your kid, right? And
it is what it is. Right.
Yeah. And so I thought that was kind of a cool moment and for Haller, it was interesting because I know for him, he felt under siege, under attack, his character being questioned. And debated last fall whether to really sort of answer some of those questions and come out and try and defend himself. The thing is, I think he did feel very comfortable with his actions. That's the thing that came through, that he was not, I asked him if he was worried about his job, and he said, not really, because you do, that's part of it. Ultimately, the buck stops with him, so to speak, but that he was comfortable in his movement to the point that if that happened, but there was nothing there that he worried about. There's nothing that was going to be uncovered. If you fall because you're the leader of an organization where things haven't gone well, that's one thing. And you learn to deal with that.
Is there anything you feel like you didn't get enough out of him? Like something that, hey, if you had a second chat, you would start the conversation with this? Kickoff times? Is it more kickoff times, you think, or no?
Yeah, no, I'm trying to think if there was something that I left there going, oh shoot, I would have, I got most of what I would have wanted, or most of what I thought I could get out of him.
It seemed like it. Yeah.
He was, and there's some stuff that I got that was off the record that you can use later. It's sort of one of those things you go back to him and maybe have that conversation a year from now, and he's willing to chat about it more. Because, there was stuff that, I think there is stuff in how the entire Mel Tucker saga unfolded from day one, when that was a hire that people were enthusiastic about. When, at one point, when Mel Tucker was 11-2, Alan Haller was very careful to claim that hire, even though he was not the AD, because he was a big part of it.
Gotcha.
And so, and how that all changed, and sort of what went wrong there. And now, in defense of the entire athletic department, and even of Mel, Mel was hired into a different economic situation in college athletics. He was hired pre-NIL.
Yeah.
And I do still wonder a little bit when we talk about the Lamborghinis and the on the field posing, the old way you used to try to recruit a 5-star kid. I think that shtick had some legs for him. And when it became much more transactional and bottom line, you've got to have 11 to 15 million annually to fund this. And initially they underestimated that. And that, was people within the football building, especially they fell behind a little bit there. And I think that hurt their momentum. But I do think the whole saga of Mel from day one he was hired, and sort of that whole search, it's something I'd love to delve into with Alan on the record at some point when you get down the road. My sense is for him, if you get a situation where your football coach is doing well and you're comfortable with Jonathan Smith, and and your other programs are doing as well as it looks like they are, then you can, a year or two from now, go down memory lane and maybe talk about the missteps and the other things, and do it in a context that isn't quite so fresh when there's still litigation going on with Mel and everything.
Yeah, right on. And like every good podcast host, I have to end this week's of shows, getting everyone into the weekend, very upset at me, because this is a selfish question. All right, we're going to do a home run trot here, Graham. Or maybe not. I don't know. You're going to be the decider of this, because you also brought up the Penn State game last year. And that's right. I could feel everyone's eyes already rolling to the back of their heads right now, because that was a big point of contention last year, moving that game to Ford Field. I was all about it. The game's at Spartan Stadium to end the year, rarely attended. This is a cool new little fun wrinkle. We did all the talking points, this, and that. But Alan Haller, kind of said that he was thankful for the fans. And you also pointed this out too, Graham. That was the highest grossing final, quote unquote, home game for Michigan State since 2016 against Ohio State. And Graham, I was at that game in 2016. That was not because of Michigan State fans. That was because of people from Columbus, Ohio. We were right? We being the pro Ford Field people. Can I trot the bases now or no?
Yeah.
Is this over?
I don't think it's a bad thing to do occasionally on that particular weekend. Although things are going to change, I do think the whole calendar is going to change. Where because of the playoff, we'll be starting a week earlier with college football, and so the regular season finales won't be that Thanksgiving week anyway. Which will make that less of a need. But yeah, I mean, let's just look at this year's Friday night game against Purdue. Would people rather be at Spartan Stadium there, or? But I think ultimately in a non-Thanksgiving week, they'd rather be at home, and Yeah, I thought it worked once. I thought if it had been a really competitive game, if Michigan State had been a competitive team, it might have been something that was a really even cooler thing. But I also understand you only get so many of these dates at home, and why people don't necessarily want that. And I wouldn't be stunned if it happened 5-6 years from now again. If the circumstances arose where it made sense to do it. But I think there was enough backlash that Haller is, aware of, that he's not going to move on it regularly.
No, that's fair. Yeah, if it's every 5-6 years, I got no issue with that. I'm not calling for it to be an every year thing. And yeah, like, it's not lost with me. The people that do deserve to complain is anyone that is west of 127. Like, sure, that's a pain all of a sudden have to travel 3 hours for a game instead of just an hour, hour and a half. But nevertheless, glad you even hit on that. You guys hit on a ton. And just like we did this chat, Graham, can't thank you enough for hopping on, for joining. I really do appreciate you as always, man.
Love being on anytime.
There we go, folks. Like we said, we will be back next week, 3 days a week. Right now, we're going to try Monday, Wednesday, Friday, adjust your lives accordingly. If it ever calls for a 4-episode week, yeah, that's right. We will open the content oven and we will pump out a 4th episode. But for now, plan on that, and also plan on having yourself a great weekend. Treat yourself good. Love you all. Go Green.